My name is Ann Link. I'm a member of the National Green Party Media Committee, which is hosting this press conference training. And I was a national media coordinator during the 2018 midterms. I'm also a co-chair of the National Women's Caucus. I've helped to organize a lot of Green Party press conferences, so I'd like to share some tips with you today. We're going to cover preparation, promotion, presentation, content, and follow-up. And we'll also look at some press conference videos from the Green Party 2016 nominating convention in Houston for examples of engaging and framing. We're going to be using the chat function in Zoom instead of raise hand, so I can get your input on the videos as we're watching. So we can go ahead and start the slide deck now.
It should be up there.
Yeah, but it needs to be in the presentation, so you have to go down on the lower left, on the lower right. And yes, that's it.
Okay.
So if you go to the next slide, we'll talk about preparation. There's a number of reasons for hosting a press conference. You could have a significant announcement that you want to make, such as your intention to run for office. You might want to react to an event or an issue that's relevant to your campaign. There could be an emergency or a crisis centered around your campaign that you want to address publicly. Or you might want to hold a joint press conference with other groups who work on the same issues. Be aware of issues if those groups are nonprofits and they can't support candidates. So you want to try to accommodate them when you're having a joint press conference like that. It's good to write up some notes in advance on note cards. This would include your name, the office you're running for, your website, a brief description of your experience, and a concise summary of several key issues in your district and how you plan to address them. It sounds silly to write your name, but sometimes when someone's introducing you, you'll actually forget to say your name, but it's really good to say your name as part of your presentation and your office that you're running for. You also want to try to anticipate questions and write down answers, particularly like the spoiler question we get a lot. Sometimes we get questions about polling. There may be things going on in your district in the news that you can expect to have questions about. So you want to prepare for those in advance. And it's better to repeat a few key points several times than many key points one time. The repetition is really key. You might be speaking at different events or different press conferences about different issues, but you always want to include a few key points at the same key points everywhere. This is because the repetition really makes a difference. We don't get a lot of press, so these opportunities that you get to speak are really important for repeating your key issues that you want people to remember. You want to include a few sound bites. These are short, catchy phrases or sentences that capture the essence of a point in a way that will be memorable to the viewer. I put a famous one here by Rosa Clemente, who was our 2008 Green Party vice presidential candidate. The Green Party is no longer the alternative. The Green Party is the imperative. And this really stuck in people's minds. I see this all the time on people's websites, in memes, on social media. Sometimes it's on campaign literature. So you want to try to think of something memorable that maybe is a little twist on something that people already know. Rhymes are good, like we're giving people a voice and a choice. I think that came from Jill Stein. The other thing you want to do is practice in front of people and listen to their feedback, and tape yourself on your phone. And this is really important, especially the first time you're presenting some information. you can get a lot of really valuable feedback. And also you might consider presenting before someone who knows nothing about the Green Party. You'll be surprised sometimes the insights you'll get from people about maybe not understanding your key point or some of the language you're using. And this will be really valuable for you when you're speaking in front of the general public. The best days for press conferences are Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. And the best time is between 10 a.m. and 11 a.m. And this is before the newscasts of the day. You want to scout out a good location in advance, especially if you're having it outdoors. You want to go to the place and make sure you're allowed to be there, that there's not security, say, for example, in a public building that don't want you on the steps. You want to make sure you've got good lighting, and you want to check out the passersby. You don't want to get too much traffic because you get people starting to want to be part of your press conference. You want to ask someone in advance with a good camera and audio equipment to photograph or tape the press conference so you can link to the photo or video from your website, YouTube, or social media pages. You also want to get a really good microphone, and it's worth buying a good microphone because the audio needs to be really clear. The audio and the picture need to be clear because television requires a certain level of quality for broadcasting. And if they perceive your video being less quality than that, you won't be included in that broadcast. I think a wireless microphone or lavalier, a wireless lavalier is good. You can just clip it on your blouse or shirt, and then you have a wireless mic pack. And this way you get the really good quality that they need. We're not going to cover it today, but you also could live stream on social media. This is especially useful if you don't actually get any press come. You know, people that are watching the video on social media aren't going to know no one's there. They're going to see you speaking as if you're at a press conference, and that way you can get extra mileage out of your press conference and distribute that video. So the next slide is on promotion. You want to get together a press list. Sometimes you can get this from your state party. Sometimes you have to create it yourself. You want to create a spreadsheet of relevant media contacts for your district, including the general email address of the newsroom that is specially designated for sending press releases. Most news outlets have an email like this. It's not a particular reporter, it's just a general input for press releases. And then it's in a spreadsheet so you can sort as needed in case you want to focus on a specialized area of reporters coverage, or an area of your state if you're running a statewide campaign. A press advisory is a press release that is giving notice of an upcoming event, and they tend to get more attention than a regular press release because they're announcing something that's going to happen. You're going to send it to your press contacts, and you can combine that with your headshot and a well-designed sheet with your key issues to make a press packet that you can put online for reporters. You want to make sure you spell check and carefully review anything you send to the press because you never want to give them a reason not to take you seriously. You can also post the news advisory and promote your campaign on social media. We'll go into more detail on this on the following slides. After you send your press advisory, you want to call or email the relevant contacts from your press list to make sure they got your advisory. Your media coordinator can do this unless you want to make a personal connection with a particular reporter. It's much harder for a reporter to ignore you when you've reached out to them, depending on the size of the media market. You also want to set up a Google alert for tracking news on your campaign as well as news on your opponents. To set up a Google alert, you go to google.com alerts and follow the instructions there. If you're running as part of a slate, you might consider having a joint press conference with a host to introduce each of you. If you're giving the news conference yourself, have someone from your campaign arrange to be there to support you, and ask for the contact information or business cards of any press who attend for follow-up. Offer to arrange a private interview if needed to expand upon your topics. The next thing we're going to talk about is the advisory itself. The next slide has a press advisory. This is a sample from our presidential nominating convention. It's got a few just quick things at the top that say what's going on. You want to send the advisory 5 to 7 days before the news conference with a follow-up call to make sure they received it. The long advance time is for certain news outlets who tend to plan more in advance, such as national TV. And then you want to send it again the day of the event between 8:30 and 10 a.m. before newsrooms have their assignment meetings. Call to make sure they received it and offer a phone or in-person interview if they can't attend. The advisory will have a short, concise description for the subject line, followed by your campaign name, website, and date. Next comes the basic info for the event in a who, what, where, when format that reporters like to see, which includes the office and district you're running for. After that comes a very brief description of the event. And depending on the size of the news site, news editors may be clicking through hundreds of emails. So you want to make sure the most important information is close to the top of the page. They're not likely to scroll down to look for things, so that's really important. And you also want to link to a high quality headshot, which is 300 dots per inch or DPI, which is the standard required by newspapers and websites. The bigger the dot, the blurrier the image. So that's why you want to have so many dots per inch. We're going to look at a sample headshot in the next slide. I pulled this off the gp.org website. This is Robin Harris, who ran for Orange County Commission District 6 in 2018 in Florida. This is a really nice, high quality headshot. It's well lit. There's a lot of detail, and it shows a really nice proportion with her head and her shoulders. If it's just your head, it can just look disembodied and disconnected. And if it's too much of your body, your head gets smaller in proportion. It's really hard to see your face. So you want to get sort of a nice proportion of just shoulders and head. And in this case, the dark jacket and the bright orange blouse she's wearing contrasts really well with a gray background. So she really stands out. And if you look closely, you can see the photographer's lights reflected in her eyes, which really draws you to look at them. If you don't know a good photographer, it's really worth paying some money to get someone to do this well, because headshots are used so often for news articles and voter guides. And this may be the only time that people see you. So be aware of your clothing and appearance and the message that it sends. The next slide is a sample of a Facebook page. I pulled this off Delilah Barrios' page. She's running for governor of Texas. I think this is a really engaging page, and it's got all the information that a reporter needs, like right off the bat. It's got her logo, a colorful logo. She's got on the left the short description of her campaign. She's got her campaign email and website, which make it easy for a reporter to contact her. And she's pinned a post with a link to a YouTube interview, so it will stay at the top of her posts. And it has a really nice colorful picture of her and an interview, which makes the page looks really engaging and like there's stuff happening with her campaign. And the other thing you want to do is you want to post a lot on your page. You want to look like stuff is continually happening, because this is meaningful to reporters. It lets them know that you've got an active campaign. The next slide is presentation. The dress and appearance are really important. The rule of thumb is you want to dress for the office that you're running for. And the best way to do this is just look on the internet and copy other elected officials for the same office. And usually this means a suit and a tie, or a blouse and a jacket, sweater, or scarf. You should be well groomed with no hat, because hat can cast a shadow over your eyes, and you want to make sure people can see your eyes. You also want to avoid stripes or bold patterns that might create a video distortion. This happens on TV for some electronic reason that I can't even explain, but I've seen it happen in shows, and it's this sort of like reverberating thing that's really distracting. The only exception to this, I would say, if you're running on a particular issue and, oh, I just saw something in the chat. It's called a moire pattern. Thank you. A caveat is if you are running with a particular emphasis on a focus group, it might be meaningful to dress like the group you're aiming at. This isn't always the case, and you want to be careful how you do it. But I think the point I want to make is you want to be deliberate about how you dress. If you want to dress like that, it should be for a particular reason. And just be aware that the regular voter may not understand and wonder why you're not dressed for the office. When you get to the podium, you want to adjust the microphone to your height. If it's too high, it's going to be in front of your face. And if it's too low, no one will be able to hear you. The other thing to remember is the podium is amplified. So anything that happens near the podium is going to be loud. Like if you've got a bracelet on, that's going to be really loud. If you're rustling papers, that's going to be amplified. So just be aware of that. When you get up there, there's no need to hurry. You just take some time, catch your breath, get your notes organized. Nothing's going to start until you start. So make sure you're ready to start, and don't start until you're get in front of the microphone. I've often seen people start talking before they get to the microphone and then leave the podium while they're still talking. So just be aware that people are not going to hear those parts unless you're right at the microphone. I put in an example of Diane Moxley, who ran for Congress from New Jersey in 2018. She and other New Jersey candidates brought their own signs, and it looked really great with the backdrop. And then you see her name and her district the entire time she's talking. You have to be considerate of where you're talking. It may not be permitted to put something on the podium, but if it's something you're organizing, then definitely think about having a sign or some sort of podium sign with your website. The other thing you can do is if you're outside, you can have some of your supporters with signs. It looks really nice, like you've got a real campaign going with quite a few people. You want to make sure to use well-designed signs and not hand-lettered signs, which again, you don't want people to not take you seriously. So I think for things like this, the graphically designed signs look really good. The other thing is she's got like a professional look with her jacket, and you can see the microphone is low enough it's not in her face, but it's also high enough you can see her speak. You want to speak clearly at a medium speed as if you're addressing a large crowd. And especially for TV cameras, you need to talk louder than you think you should with more emphasis than you think you should. And it sounds weird when you're standing in a room with just 5 people, but when you see yourself on TV, you realize that it sounds just right. And if you talked any lower, you start to fade out. So just remember to really amplify yourself. You want to be aware of filler words, which I use a lot, sort of, you know. These are words that go in between sentences, and you're not always aware of them unless you tape yourself, and that's why it's really good to practice. The reason for these words a lot of time is you're just buying some time before your next sentence or thought. So if that's the case and you're like me, you want to really prepare your notes. So you limit the amount of time you have to think on your feet, and that's when you're likely to use more of these filler words. Pause briefly between your paragraphs and before and after delivering your sound bites. It's sort of like an essay where you write in paragraphs. You want to also do that when you're speaking. You don't want to just speak in a monotone and just keep droning on without stopping, because it just really gets boring to the viewer. The other thing that you want to do is you want to use volume. So when you're talking about an important point, talk a little louder, and then softer in between. And then if you're enumerating something, you would say like, 1, I want to do this. 2, I plan to do this. And if you use the volume appropriately with your content, it can be very, it really adds to people paying attention. It makes you more interesting to listen to. When you answer a question, you want to try to incorporate the question into your answer to give it some context. Some people do this, they just restate the question, or you could just repeat the question. Why am I running for office? Well, I want to accomplish these things. And that way, when someone's editing your video, they get the whole piece in context without having to include the person asking the question. You also want to imagine how your speech will be edited. Video editors require broadcast quality video and audio with a dynamic topic in an interesting location with enough space between spoken phrases for proper editing. The space is really important because I compare it to sewing a dress, where you have the part you see and then you have the inner parts that you sew together. You don't see them, but they're very important. And it's the same thing when you're editing video clips. Those spaces between phrases give the editor a lot of leeway in how they're going to put things together and make a really good finished product. So you want to videotape yourself as you practice and imagine someone else watching it. The next slide is on content. Pick 3 main points from your list of issues to focus on and cover them concisely. Reporters are looking for interesting and provocative articles to write about, so try to create an engaging and compelling story for them that's impossible to ignore. Give your name and office at the beginning and the end of your allotted time. If it's a district office, then give the name of the areas or towns it includes, because most people really don't know the number of their district. And I actually just moved and I don't know the number of my district. So by including the towns, you make it clear that this is an office that you're going to represent them. It takes at least 4 minutes to just transcribe 1 minute of audio. So it's really important to repeat key points so that reporters have time to write them down. If you speak too fast, then people are trying to process what you just said. At the same time, they're trying to process what you're saying next, and they're just not going to remember anything. So like I said, raise the volume of your voice to emphasize important points and give examples of what you're talking about. Include relevant personal experience, especially any that relates to the office you're running for. Include the reason you're running and keep the focus on you and your campaign. Include concrete examples how you will address key issues in the office so that the viewer can imagine you in the office you're running for. Also, I want to talk a little about framing. George Lakoff is a linguist who describes frames as mental structures that shape the way we see the world. A reporter's frame is called an angle, and it's a specific viewpoint or perspective from which they tell their story. Consider the reporter's frame of reference and unspoken assumptions behind questions such as, are you the spoiler in this race? Try to challenge their frame in your answer. Think of new and inventive ways of talking about your campaign that tell a different story than the angle the reporter has created. We're going to see some examples of framing a bit later when we watch the video. So now we're going to look at some videos. Before you start playing, this is from our Green Party 2016 presidential nominating convention. These are really good examples of staging because the lighting is good and the background is engaging. We rented a mult box for the room, and this is a box with multiple outlets from a single audio source so that multiple people can record from the same microphone. Since the sound is coming directly from the microphone, it's very clear without a lot of background noise that might be distracting, such as the sound echoing off the walls, people coughing, papers rustling. These videos were shot from the side, but it's better to position your camera in front of the candidate so they can look into the camera periodically while speaking. These are a couple local candidates and one congressional candidate who are being introduced by a host before they speak. I want you, as you watch these, try to pretend you're a reporter or a video editor and use the chat to say what you think about each candidate from that vantage point and in light of what we've discussed. You could start the video on this one. I'm not hearing him. I think you might have to turn your audio on.
So all the media.
I'm going to start.
My name is Joshua Harris. I'm a candidate for mayor in Baltimore City. And I think the nation has really been watching Baltimore for the last year and several months as we saw all the media headlines, Baltimore was on fire last April. And the reality is that Baltimore was burning a long time before that. And it was due to ineffective policies, neglect, and divestment. And I believe that the single greatest issue is distribution of capital in Baltimore City. Who controls it? And in Baltimore, just like we see on the national level, unfortunately, it's the corporate interest that has led to 40 and 50 years of neglect in East and West Baltimore that caused people to rise up last spring. And so in that, every single day, that's the work that I'm doing to counter what has been put in place to hold down, ignore, and not let the voices be heard of the many, if you will, in Baltimore City. And I was raised by a single mother, so I spent a lot of time with my grandmother, who used to take myself and my younger brother and my older brother, my younger sister, to events where people wore green shirts and they were protesting all the time. And then sometimes they would just meet and plan, and other times they would celebrate together like a family. And it wasn't until I was older that I realized that she worked for the union, fighting for fair wages and workers' rights, because she believed, just like she taught me to believe, that we all deserve equal access and opportunity to be successful. That every single one of us deserves not a minimum wage job opportunity, but a living wage job opportunity. That we all deserve to know what it feels like to one day become homeowners, and that every single one of us deserves the opportunity to provide our children with a quality public education. And so those things will only happen if we continue to unite and to fight for what's right, even if it means that you're not a part of the corporate establishment and the status quo. And so that's what we're doing. And I'll end with this. Knowing that individuals do not create revolutions, but conditions do. And the conditions in Baltimore, as well as the conditions nationwide, have been set so much to where people are tired of the same old politics. They're tired of business as usual. And right now is a moment where we're seeing the opportunity for people to really stand and do something totally different than what we've seen before. And so this week is an exciting week to be here in Houston, exciting to see the presidential nomination come forward from the Green Party, exciting to see the Green Party grow, and most importantly, exciting to see people to take a stand for what's right, even if that means you're breaking the status quo. So again, thank you. My name is Joshua Harris, and I look forward to spending the rest of the next few days with you all.
So I'm just looking at the chat. KJ said this candidate is very passionate about the issue of Baltimore City. He's exposing the neglect from the two parties. Cheryl said he is clear and engaging. Hillary said, man, he was good. Starlene said he sure was. And Margaret Elizabeth said, Democrats have a stranglehold on Baltimore. And I like how he emphasized that his election would be breaking the status quo. I want to point out the way he's dressed. He's really dressed for the office. And he also has a button with his name and his office, which you see in the entire video. So it tends to stick in your head. And he's using he really uses volume, because I listened to this a couple of times. He used volume and the spaces between groups of thoughts to really hold your attention. And I found him really inspiring because of this. I also liked the story of the union organizing that he saw as a child. I thought that was really an interesting, I have a visual picture from that I actually remember 6 years later when I listened to this again. I remember that story that stood out. And I think that's all I had to say. Oh, he had a soundbite: continue to unite and fight for what's right. Okay, so we can go on to the next one.
My name is Joshua.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
I'm very happy to be here this morning.
Let me start this again.
I'm very happy to be here this morning. As they introduced, my name is Ashley. Flash is my nickname, Gordon, and I am a part of the Travis County Greens. I'm running for County Commissioner for Precinct 1. In case you haven't been to Travis County, this is where our capital is. Let me tell you a little bit about us. I am from Travis County, where gentrification is happening in real time. If you have been to the city of Austin, East Austin used to be historically Black. Now in East Austin, if you drive through on 11th Street or 12th Street, you'll see new developments, but you don't see old faces. And if you do see those faces, they have to travel in from Pflugerville or Manor in order to enjoy the few cultural relics that still exist in the area. Everyday people's homes that they got from their grandparents and great-grandparents are torn down thanks to eminent domain and replaced with condominiums that are being filled with the tech bros. I know that's not a politically correct term, but that's what's happening. East Austin is a space that's very close to downtown, and so we're seeing traditional Austinites driven out. In fact, when people tell us they're from Austin originally, everyone is in shock because there is just not a space for Austinites anymore. I am from Travis County, where mothers from Pflugerville come and tell me that they have to take the toll road to get to work, to only take 20 minutes to get to work. They can't take I-35, or they'll have to wake up another hour earlier to get in. Now, this mother has been forced out into Pflugerville, which is north of Austin, because she can't afford to live in the city. Her family can afford it. But then she has to pay the toll. She can't afford to pay the toll. The city doesn't care about those who have been pushed to the outside.
Any comments on Ashley Flash Gordon? I'm going to go ahead. You guys could chat if you want to think of some things. I was really struck by how close she was to her constituents, and she used the terms us, we, people that she knew. So she's really knows what's going on in her district. And I feel that the story, she tells a story which is of individuals. And I think if I were a reporter, I would want to interview one of those people. It's basically the flip side of gentrification. I think she really does a really great job of talking about just what everyday people are going through. The other thing she does is she paces her speech by pausing between points. The comments, she seems nervous. Yeah, you know, this was the first press conference for some of the candidates. So they're going through what we all go through is the first time you give your speech and, you know, you're a little nervous or, and that's why it's good to practice in advance, you know, so you can get used to being in front of the audience, listening to yourself, seeing what the reaction of the audience is. Holly said she's a very good tie-in with her own situation, a moving depiction of a problem. And then here's Michael put a link, and then Michael Lavery. Yeah, she passed away a couple years after this press conference, and very sad, just on a personal level, but just the loss of the potential as a candidate and organizer. Okay, we can go to the next one.
I'm very happy.
I'm Gary Stewart. I'm a native Texan. I'm from Houston originally. Coming back to the humidity feels like a homecoming. But I am running for House District 32 against Pete Sessions. I'm also the chief organizer for System Change, Not Climate Change, the Eco-Socialist Coalition for the United States and Canada up in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. The reason why I'm running is manifold. I've been a Green, or at least Green at heart for a long time. I was one of the early organizers for the Greens in Texas back in the late 80s, as well as working with the National Greens on developing a platform for LGBT people back in the late 80s. But really what drives me is climate disruption, global warming. As you all know, we have very little time, precious little time, to drastically, radically reverse course. Not only no carbon emissions, and I should add methane emissions, but negative emissions. We've seen the disruption here in the state. I saw the flooding that happened here in Houston earlier this year. Each month is hotter than the next, on and on and on. And yet we have a Congress, we have a government, local, state, national, even international, but national government that most of them refuse to believe in the reality of global warming and climate change. And Pete Sessions doesn't believe in it, or he's not allowed to believe it
due to his corporate masters, particularly the oil and gas industry, which he is beholden to.
Betsy wrote about the sound. I noticed that too. It may be the connection or something to do with video. I pull these clips, so it may have something to do with the editing. We're still using the Molt box, so it should have been clear like the other ones. So that's why I think it might have been something to do with the video. Any other comments about this one? Shirt works in this case. Also, they were in Houston. It was super hot. So some of the way people are dressed has to do with that. I think if you're in that situation, what you can do is put a jacket in your bag and just put it on during the press conference and take it off later. I want to bring up something. He's running for federal office, and you notice that he's more general, and that's because his district is so big. He's running for Congress. So if you're doing sort of a general press conference, you don't want to get too specific to a certain area in your state that other people aren't going to relate to. So he does talk about flooding and things, but it's more general in focus with his general issue of climate change. And the other thing was, normally you wouldn't care to mention your opponent necessarily. You might say my opponent or the current mayor, or, but you wouldn't actually use their name. But in this case, Pete Sessions is so universally hated that it can actually be an advantage to bring up the person you're running against so that people know that they have an option. And again, it also identifies, since they may not know what is House District 32, by naming the person you're running against, it also identifies where you are and what election you're going to be in. So next, we're going to look at some examples of framing. So these are a couple clips from the press conference after the Green Party 2016 presidential nominating convention. The room was packed. There was tons of reporters and cameras, and the winning candidates, Jill Stein and her running mate, Ajamu Baraka, were taking turns answering questions. I'm going to show a couple of questions that require a lot of framing as an example. And as you watch these, think about what angle the reporter is using as their frame of reference and how she's addressing that. And feel free to make your comments in the chat. Oh, Holly, can you stop for a second?
Yeah.
I forgot, I'm going to read the questions because the people are not mic'd up. So it's probably going to be hard for you to hear. The question is, this is Al Jazeera reporter. How do you realistically think you can close the polling gap to get to 15%, which is the baseline for the debates? You're nowhere near there. You're running out of time. And a recent poll, 68% of Americans said they had never heard your name. Okay, go ahead.
How do you realistically close the polling gap to get to 15%? You're nowhere near there. You're running out of time. And in a recent poll, 68% of Americans said they had never heard your name. And shall we say it's no surprise, considering that there's been a just about complete media blackout on our campaign. I consider it actually astonishing that the McClatchy-Marist poll yesterday showed us at 6%, despite a complete media blackout. That's the story, in my view. If we could get to 6%, having been invisible 2 months ago, where can we go now that the media is being forced to actually cover us as the really emerging force starting in Philadelphia? Our name was everywhere, and the chants of Jill Not Hill were everywhere, including inside of the DNC. So, we are a very difficult story to continue to suppress. We know that Donald Trump got the jumpstart that he did with $2 billion worth of free media, and that was about 2 months ago, according to the New York Times analysis. Bernie Sanders had somewhere under 500 million, and Hillary Clinton had somewhere just shy of $1 billion.
So I think they've had a little bit of a head start. I think our demand should be for actual real coverage, real press, and let's let the debate be held before we try to shut it down, which is certainly what the powers that be are trying to do.
Hey, okay, Gloria says Jill identifies the real story, which is a great reframe, and then gives examples of how media spin and bid money influencing elections. Any other comments? Oh, sorry, big.
You want the next one?
No, I'm going to talk for a minute. That question is, it's almost like an existential, like who, why are you, what's the point? You know, like it's a really tough question. I thought she did just a great job. Eileen said, brilliant retort. Betsy said, great, not accepting the premise of the question. She was obviously prepared, and you know, she brings up a lot of great factual information, like the money people are spending, and the reframing is that 6%, they're on their way up. So you know, it's just it's a trajectory, and so I thought she did a really great job of changing that idea of looking at a poll as just a fixed thing and seeing it as something that's changing. I want to bring up polling because it's such an issue for Greens, especially in the federal races where they do a lot of polling, because almost every debate requires a certain amount in the polls. But they're supposed to be scientific, but they're actually very biased. And so if you get a poll on your own campaign, you want to make sure that you actually go in and look at the poll questions. You might have to do a little searching, but usually the people who run the poll will have it at their website. You want to actually look at what the questions said, and often the Green Party isn't even included. Will be lumped in with a category called other, you know, including all the other candidates beside the Democrat and the Republicans. And then often the candidates themselves, they'll have the Democrat and the Republican candidate, and the Green Party candidate isn't even mentioned. So it's a rigged system. And so if you find yourself in this situation, it's a good thing to make a big stink about, because it's a campaign killer to not be included in debates. In polls. And the other thing about polls, it gives the candidates important information about how they're doing, so that they can change, they can change things about what they're doing, and we don't get that advantage. So definitely, something you could do is you could send an open letter to the polling company and put that in a press release. But definitely there's a story there for reporters. I'm just looking at the chat. Typical question. So she was able to prepare a great response. Sorry, I don't want to lose any. Claiming the big money is momentum is very clever. Also, we need to push polls to ask who most closely reflects your views, rather than who are you likely to vote for. Craig says candidates should do sessions with their team, having them play reporter and asking questions. It helps you formulate answers ahead of time, so you limit the possibility of being tripped up if interviewed. Okay, we can go on to the next one. Oh, wait. I was able to find the reporter's story, so I pulled a few paragraphs out, and it's really interesting here because she doesn't use Dr. Stein's exact points, but she does bring up the same subjects. Unlike the Democratic and Republican conventions, there is no army of media here to tell the story. In fact, if I tried to get the media that are here to play a game of pickup football, we wouldn't even have enough to make a team. That is just one of the many difficulties facing third parties. The Democrats and Republicans joined together to come up with a debate commission. The problem for third-party candidates is that the media organizations that pay for the polls rarely include anyone other than the two-party candidates. If third-party candidates aren't even included in the polls, they have absolutely no chance of being included in the debates. So this is the same person that made that sort of negative question. She was actually able to reframe her angle and it turned into this angle. So this is a really great example of reframing. Okay, ready for the next one. And I'll talk about it first before you play it. This is a tweet from Dr. Stein that I've posted next to the video. The tweet says, Democrats are now accusing Russia of manipulating our presidential election. Exactly what DNC was caught doing. I'm going to say the questions first because it's hard to hear them. And he makes a question and then he repeats it later. Question 1. You mentioned the DNC leak, and last week you tweeted, quote, Democrats are now accusing Russia of manipulating our presidential election. Exactly what DNC was caught doing. Do you view political wrongdoing as negative or on par with what a lot of cybersecurity experts say was something instigated by a foreign government or people aligned with them? And then he asks the question again a little later. But how do you view what potentially may have been instigated by Russia or its allies as on par with the DNC leak per your tweet? You said in your tweet that it's chess-like what the DNC was doing. Do you think that's a fair comparison? Okay, so let's see how she handles this.
Dr. Stein, I'm Elliot Nelson with the Huffington Post. You mentioned the DNC leak, and last week you tweeted, quote, Democrats are now accusing Russia of manipulating the presidential election, exactly what DNC was caught doing. Do you view political wrongdoing, however potential negative, as on par with what a lot of cybersecurity experts say was something instigated by foreign government or people aligned with them?
Well, let me say it's, if in fact this was foul play from Russia, this is what goes on all the time. This is not something new or surprising. This is the way the game works. And there's nothing unusual or surprising about that. And I'll just note that there have been proposals for a treaty to stop this kind of backstabbing through cyberspace and spying through cyberspace and theft of data. There are treaties out there that the US has not been willing to step up to and to promote. So we will certainly work very hard to put an end to this kind of backstabbing through cyberspace.
But do you view what potentially may have been instigated by Russia or its allies as on par with the DNC, like per your tweet? You said in your tweet that it's chess-like what the DNC was doing.
So, in other words, Russia is spying on us and the DNC as the DNC was backstabbing Bernie Sanders. I think none of that is, let me put it another way, all of that is reprehensible. And, you know, the DNC is kind of accusing Russia of being underhanded and sneaky in order to cover up the DNC's underhanded and sneaky behavior towards the Sanders campaign.
Any comments on that? This is one where she had to think on her feet. It sounds like very good responses. I'll start talking while you're chatting. Instead of framing, he's giving her, basically he's giving her two choices. He's saying, are these the same? She adds her own framing of the issue, which is that the US government has not supported any treaties. And when he asks again, instead of saying which is worse, which he seems to want her to say, are these equal or is one worse than the other? She says both are reprehensible. And this is really important. It's a little awkward to watch, but sometimes there's reasons that you don't want to answer a question. And in this case, if she had answered the question, he might have written an article about it that could have been very distracting to the campaign. So, you know, I just want to make it clear that you don't always have to answer a question. You don't want to be rude about it. You don't want to say, I'm not going to answer that question. But, if it's something where the answer, you're sort of being pushed in a corner by someone, you can, offer them something like she said on the treaty. And, it's a little uncomfortable to watch, but she didn't give him anything that he could use in print. And none of that discomfort is going to end up in print. So it really doesn't matter. Someone told me that works in media that they'll ask the question 3 times before they give up. And so you just need to make it through the 3 times. And, but it's better to do that than to be on record saying something that you don't mean. Let me move up a little and look at your comments here. She was confident, not thrown by the questions. She should have said the DNC was far worse. It prevented the Democrat voters from having a choice. Good way of not falling into the quicksand. Yeah, I mean, I guess people will have different opinions about this, but when I looked at it a few times, I felt like that it was really good that she didn't get caught up in what his framing of the situation was. Okay, so we're going to go to the next slide. This is our press conference follow-up, and then we'll get into the summary. After your news conference, you want to send a press release with photo, video links, and quotes, and we'll look at some examples in the next couple of slides. You want to call and email the relevant contacts from your press list to follow up, and your media coordinator can do this and forward any specific questions to you. Check your Google alerts for any coverage and promote it on your website and social media pages. Drawing traffic to online coverage will increase the chances of future coverage. If there's an opportunity to comment on an article online, ask your staff and reporters to respond ASAP. Giving positive or negative if the article is critical feedback early on may affect how others perceive the article. I've seen this so many times. It's like lemmings falling off the cliff. If the comments are good, you get good comments following. If they're bad, everyone piles on. So as much as possible, you want to have your own people getting in there and writing good things. The responses should cover content only and be respectful of the writer and other commenters. You may want to respond as well to clarify inaccuracies in the article. Note any coverage in your press list and reach out to reporters who covered you to see if they want to follow up on any questions. Add any new writers who are not already on your spreadsheet. Review the photos and video and audio of your press conferences and make adjustments to your presentation. So the next slide is an example of a follow-up press release from our last presidential convention. This is not a candidate announcement, so it's written a little differently. But it's got the same main things that you need. You're going to add your media coordinator's name and contact info at the top. You'll include your campaign website and social media addresses and a link to a high quality headshot, or in this case, they have a really nice engaging photo that's really well designed. You want to review photos and videos from the news conference and include links to the best photos, again, 300 DPI, or videos posted on YouTube. And you want to use your social media channels to distribute the content in the release. And it's getting to the point where it used to be a big deal when a reporter didn't come to the press conference. Now it's sort of like, well, I could just distribute this myself. So think of ways that you can, make your own media. Okay, we can move to the next one. Here's an example of a press release from a candidate who announced their campaign without, as far as I know, holding a press conference. This is Michael Badges Canning running for Lieutenant Governor in Pennsylvania, and this is a press release where he announces his candidacy. He's got a quote next to his image, and below that there's a short sentence about his seeking the nomination, followed by some biographical information. Next comes the office he's running for, the date, and contact info. The body of the release highlights his key issues. It's hard to see here, but he talks about some main things that he's going to support in office, and includes more quotes. And one of the reasons I brought this up is because the way he's dressed, he isn't dressed for the office he's running for. But if you look at his quotes, it's a lot to do with the local person not being represented properly. So the flannel shirt and the man at work photo goes really well with his message. And so, in this case, it sort of fits the audience. So again, you want to be calculated about the way you dress, and be aware if he dressed down like this and went to a forum, that it might actually be perceived as an insult. So you want to be sensitive to the places you're speaking and how your dress might be perceived by them. Okay, the last slide is just basically a summary. I hope it's clear now that there's a lot of things that you can do to affect your coverage. Looking and sounding professional, giving engaging presentation, reframing questions, and making use of any opportunities you have to manage your coverage. So we're going to have a sort of a fun review, which is, this is another candidate from the press conference I showed earlier. It's Susan Sonny. She's the 2016 candidate for Buena Park City Council District 3. And so I'd like you to write in the chat all the things that she's doing that we talked about today. I'm not here.
Buena Park, California, District 3.
I'm sorry, did you want to start that over?
Yeah, go ahead, start over.
My name is Susan Sonny, and I'm running for City Council in Buena Park, California, District 3. Everyone's been talking about the global issues that we're experiencing, including climate catastrophe, social and economic inequality, and a growing frustration with a system that doesn't represent all of us. As I've learned to affect change and become aware of the links between global issues and local decisions, I've had a growing sense of urgency that we should all be a part of the solution. Therefore, I'm running for City Council. I have spent the last greater than 35 years in the IT industry and become very active locally in the past year. I have served on the Buena Park Collaborative, been selected for the Police Chiefs Advisory Board, the Homeless Committee, and I'm working with the Anaheim Poverty Task Force to help homeless issues in Orange County. I've become a homeless advocate and am working to dispel the many myths around it. I am committed to grassroots democracy, and I hope to combine my experience in IT with that to take advantage of a new group of tools that have been created to allow people to participate in democracy via the internet. So my campaign is building a grassroots movement of committed residents locally to take advantage of these tools and to become passionate and energetic leaders. I'm a child of the 60s. National elections mobilize a vast swath of people who normally don't vote in local elections. So we have an unprecedented opportunity right now. I've never seen a national election like this one. And so that's why I've decided to run. Thank you very much. Looking forward to this weekend with everyone. I'm Susan Sonny, and I'm running for City Council in Buena Park, California.
Any comments about what she did that we talked about? I wrote some things down. She adjusts her microphone to be at the right spot in front of her. She's dressed professionally. She has a print shirt on, but that's not so distracting that it takes your attention away. A jacket. So she looks like she actually could be in a city council meeting. Yeah, she recapped her point at the end. She also gave her name and her office again at the end. She outlines the issues that have led her to run for office. She says what she will do once in office. And the other thing is that she pauses as she speaks. So that's great for an editor to try to put that together. So that's the end. But there's one final comment that I want to make, which is try not to see reporters as the enemy. you know, you'll get negative questions and articles, but there's all sorts of reasons why reporters might file a negative story. It might have to do with their editor, pressure from their editor, or the target market. It may be that this is their first job and it's maybe not even paper they really like, but they're doing it so they can get into the business. So you want to try to build a relationship if you can, and remember that reporters change jobs and end up in different places, and sometimes you run into them again. So it's really good not to burn your bridges, and obviously you want to correct, you know, inaccuracies and try to reframe, reframe what they're saying, but try to build a relationship to them because they are a conduit to the voter. That's the end. My name is Ann Link, and I'm a member of the National Green Party Media Committee, which is the host of this press conference training. Bye, everyone.